Welcome to Building My Legacy podcast. This podcast is designed for leaders and entrepreneurs who want to leave a legacy and will provide strategies that focus upon key elements for legacy creation, determining your desired impact and its benefit, increasing your legacy's reach by engaging key stakeholders, planning, prioritizing, and executing. Here's your host, Dr. Lois Sonstegard.
Hi, Frank. This is Lois Sonstegard, and I'm here with Frank Wagner. He is a coach with Marshall Goldsmith, does Stakeholder-Centered coaching, and has been instrumental in coaching some of the key CEOs around the world, and uses a methodology that has been proven to be incredibly effective. And so I wanted to have Frank begin by sharing a little bit about who he is and how he came to do what he's doing. So, Frank, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I got my start in the academic world, getting a PhD, and my initial plans were to be a university professor. And in fact, just this past weekend, I kicked off a cohort MBA program. This is people that are fully employed. They come in fundamentally for weekend classes. And I'm kicking off a new cohort that will be together for 15 months, taking one class at a time. So I still do some academic work. Yet when I started, Marshall Goldsmith was also one of the PhD candidates. We taught together at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles and then became business partners. So our career really started as trainers. And for then a couple of decades, we did nothing but leadership training. In that time, we would be working with leaders to give them feedback based upon 360 feedback, sitting down one-on-one and doing goal setting and action planning. Yet that was the extent of, if you call us a coach, what we did. Then around 1999, Marshall really came up with this amazing, elegant, sophisticated, effective coaching methodology in terms of working with effective leaders, and asked me to be involved in that at the beginning, and then eventually asked me to overall be in charge of the design and training of other people to coach like him. So I've been doing that literally since about, let's just say 2000. Still do training. I'll be doing some next week. Yet the focus now is on coaching either individuals or executive teams.
So, Frank, when you work with leaders, I know one of the things that Marshall speaks about is he coaches successful leaders. And so people who are already successful at what they do. But why do successful business leaders need a coach?
Well, by the way, everyone could use a coach. It doesn't matter what your level of success is. Now, what some people find maybe confusing is why does someone who's highly successful, and even when I say successful, we're talking about successful not only in the business side in terms of results, they're also successful in terms of people really admire and respect them as leaders. So why would someone like that need a coach? Well, for one reason, that's part of why the most successful are seen that way. They never consider that they can't continually improve themselves. So you take any field. You can take the field of music, and the music could be a musician, it could be a singer. You take acting world, you take sports, everything out of the business world. Forever, the most successful people continue to work to get better because they know it's hard enough to get to the top. It's even harder to stay on top. So, and by the way, a lot of successful leaders don't need anything to work on to improve because they're doing something wrong, yet they can actually build on a strength. So we all can get better all the time. In fact, Jim Kouzes and Barry Posner, who are probably two of the most respected people that do research in the field of leadership and really cross over between the academic world and the kind of world that we live in, the corporate world, they wrote a book called The Truth About Leadership. And it's the 10 endearing truths about leadership that transcend changes in environment, changes in situations, that will always be the sign of an effective leader. And one of those 10 is the best leaders are the best learners. So think about it. You want a leader at the very top, very successful. They actually see that their organization and all the people around them need to continually learn. What's one of the best ways to ensure that happens? Lead by example.
So, Frank, for an individual like that is like a sponge, soaking up learning and wanting to share that with their colleagues so they can just be better, what does a coach bring to them? How does a coach add value so that they can really go to the next level?
Okay, well, first of all, as you know, Lois, because you are one of our certified coaches, is that one of the things that Marshall did that is very different from most coaching is spreading out the coaching. Most of corporate America coaching, when someone hires a coach, it's a single point success or failure. I mean, they think they're hiring a coach for the coach's expertise. The coach is going to be an advisor. The coach is going to help the leader see things through a fresh pair of eyes, see things differently, bring a different experience base to help that leader. Our methodology makes pretty much a large section of people around the leader into their day-to-day coaches. So we call them the stakeholders. Now, in other words, our methodology, what you're bringing is a methodology, not necessarily any content expertise. And in a pure sense, that can still work and be highly effective for a leader, because what we're providing is a way in which a leader gets feedback, and what Marshall coined as feed forward or suggestions on an ongoing basis for reinforcement of what they're working on to improve. Now, having said that, the other thing that we bring as a value is an outside perspective. A lot of times, especially at the most senior levels, it's like people feel they almost have no confidant or someone on the outside they can talk with. And we can provide that avenue also in terms of our work. And most of our coaches do bring levels of content expertise. You know, for instance, Marshall and I got cut our teeth as trainers in corporate America teaching a framework developed by Paul Hersey and Ken Blanchard called situational leadership. And I'll be watching a leader that I'm coaching, and they may be working on something that really doesn't directly relate to situational leadership, yet I'll notice that they're not applying that framework very well. And I might point it out to them, then send them a quick article, and then all of a sudden they start incorporating that. And that little thing makes a big difference, what we call a tipping point in terms of helping that leader be effective. So we primarily play a role in our methodology as a orchestrator, a facilitator of a process, yet we can also provide some level of expertise that will help the leader.
So, Frank, could you just share a little bit about what stakeholder-centered coaching is and how you go about it? And before you do that, I think one of the things that just really fascinated me and still really engages me with the process is how pragmatic it is. It isn't a time eater. And so many things that you get involved with, by the time you're finished, I'm not sure if the exhaustion that follows or comes with it almost exceeds the value. And sure. I think the reverse happens with stakeholder-centered coaching. So if you could just speak a little bit about how it works and what you see with it.
Right. Sure, Lois. And that's what excites me about it is it's amazingly effective. And also it leads to the right outcomes, which you pretty much alluded to or more clearly actually mentioned, is that the end of it is, did the benefits outweigh the costs? In other words, was this worth it? Was the investment? We all have a limited pool of energy and a limited areas of priority we can focus on. And was this worth it to the leader? Now, see, our stakeholder-centered coaching, first of all, is based on a number of, you might say, principles. And the first principle is that what we're really doing is we're focusing on stakeholders. And the reason we do that is, see, a lot of people, and I would say I was part of this, naively think that when the leader's going to actually improve, which means changing behavior, our area is leadership behavior, that it's all about the leader changing. And you know what? It's not just that. Everyone around the leader needs to change. And so, part of it is that the principle is we're using stakeholders. That's why we're focusing on them. For another principle is that behavior has to change and perception has to change. And we always ask the question, how hard is it to change a habit? And you can put a number on it, a scale. And, most people go pretty high up on the scale on changing behavior for an adult that's got an ingrained habit. The second thing is, how hard is it to change opinion, perception, using the same scale? Funny, most people, when you actually ask this question, they'll end up saying harder. And there's also a lag. For a person to change their perception, they need evidence. Yeah. So the change has to come first. And the change first comes, there's a cognitive dissonance in all of us that, that's different from my sense of reality. I probably should reject that. It's probably just an anomaly of the situation. Is this person really changing or not? And it takes a while for them to say that person has actually changed. So there's a lag between behavior change and perception of change. So that's why we heavily invest in stakeholders. Also, you had mentioned, Marshall works with successful people. Well, you know what? I haven't met a person who in their own heart-to-heart, looking at themselves, see themselves as anything else, yet they are but successful. They're successful. Now, not necessarily successful as some other people, but we're all successful. And because of that, we like to be the cause of success. And so if you're the cause of success, you've earned it. And that's what our methodology does. Here's how it basically works. A leader chooses a goal. And how they choose a goal, variety of ways that can happen. As part of choosing a goal, though, we have them do a cost-benefit analysis. What are the benefits of this change? When they get better at it, what benefits they will accrue? If they don't change, what would be the cost? So, and if you understand that, those are benefits. But yet, all things have a cost too. As you said, you got to put out energy. You've got to spend the time. You got to do the heavy lifting. That's a cost. Right. So they do the cost benefit analysis. They say it's worth it. So they pick a goal. Now, here's where our methodology really diverges. They actually pick stakeholders who's relevant. This can be anywhere from a half dozen to a dozen or more stakeholders. Then they go public. They actually make this an open door, not behind in some closet somewhere with a coach. Now the stakes are raised, because now other people are aware they're working on this and they're asked to participate. They're involved. And guess what? A stakeholder would like to be successful too. So they want to help this leader be effective. So now we have a team effort. The leader uses these stakeholders to actually give suggestions on the goal. And then we build an action plan fundamentally based on stakeholder input. So now we've got a much more active involvement of a cast of characters as opposed to just a coach working with a leader. And then the rest of the process is simply the process of sharing the goal and the plan. So now the stakeholders know what to look for. And then it's the follow-up. How much does a leader implement their plan, follow up with their stakeholders, check in, how am I doing? Any further suggestions? We put them through charm school on not to be defensive in these conversations, to say thank you, work with the coach, implement their plan. And then finally, the only other thing that makes us different is measuring results. It's what we call a mini survey. Now, the mini survey is a little bit more elaborate in this, but for the argument here, the most important question is leader's stakeholders are asked on a -3 to +3 scale. By the way, the middle choice is 0. So there you can go -3, -2, -1, meaning I think the leader got worse to a certain degree by trying this new behavior, or they didn't change at all with a 0, or a +1, +2, or +3. This is anonymous, electronic survey, anonymous survey, and this validates the change. And I love this because it gives the leader credit. The leader, in the eyes of others, have said they got better. And also then when they share their results, not all the details, but they share results that I appreciate you for all of your responses that I got better. The stakeholders feel like, wow, I contributed to this thing because they benefited from this change in the leader's behavior. So that's stakeholder-centered coaching in a simple form.
Frank, part of what you're saying with that just, I think, resonated with me was I've been a part of organizations and worked with teams and leaders. And one of the things that I've observed is that when you have a group that has made up their mind that something isn't working or the leader isn't resonating with them, they may have already imbued failure into the leader. So no matter what they do, they're perceived as having failure. And what I love about the mini survey is it forces them to make an evaluation as to whether or not there's improvement. They can't just have this value judgment that they hold on to for any period of time that says this person can't succeed. And, part of the importance of that, I think, comes from research that's been done, especially in the academic setting with young learners, where in first grade, for example, research found that teachers made decisions about first graders in the first 15 minutes of school, in the first day of class. And that then carried with that student that label for the next 6 years. It took 6 years to effect some change. But the problem with organizations is the organization moves and changes. And so if people can't see that you're moving and changing with them, it's like you can never catch up. So the beauty of this is it really rewards effort, and it rewards a team effort of recognition. And you are absolutely right, Frank. I have not seen any other model that really addresses that so people can really be successful.
Yeah, the thing is, we all, have a very hard time changing our view of the world around us. We like the stability of saying, I can predict, I know what's going on around me. There's a safety in that. Change is hard for everybody. And whether it's the behavior change or the perception change. And see, if you look at what we do in stakeholder-centered coaching, if you describe what we do, is we help leaders achieve a sustainable, long-term, positive change in behavior. And here's the key part, that's recognized and acknowledged by others. So there's that acknowledgement part, which, by the way, if I say, Lois, I used to think you weren't that good of a listener. I'm not saying you're the world's greatest listener now, but I do believe you are becoming a very effective listener. I'm voicing to myself that reinforcement that I'm changing my perception of you.
Right.
And that's why, it's such a systems approach to change that Marshall came up with.
Right. And it's that acknowledgement, isn't it, that makes all the difference, because until we verbalize it, we don't internalize it.
Mm-hmm.
So are there any times when it doesn't work, when you look
Sure.
at a situation, you say, you know what, there are people for whom coaching simply won't work?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, there's a lot of people. Well, first of all, our methodology is around behavior change. Now, again, that doesn't mean that the goals themselves are specified as behavior. The very first assignment I did, and we were making this up as we went. Marshall asked me to coach in this Agile Technologies that just split off from HP. They wanted sort of the top 24 people, and this 24 wasn't just by the organization chart. It was considered to be the people that they thought would bring Agile to the next plateau and be successful. And in fact, one of these was a young guy in his 30s that I was asked to coach. And he worked on treating people with respect. That was his goal. Well, treating people with respect is not a goal, it's an outcome. And, people, because your behavior you could behave in a certain way to two people. One found it very disrespectful, another couldn't care less. So what are the behaviors that lead to this treating people with respect? So we're working on leadership behavior. Now, so in other words, if leaders, first of all, working on something that's not really a behavior, or related to that aspect of leadership, our methodology isn't that relevant in terms of what we do. The other thing is we cannot change people's fundamental nature. So for instance, ethics. If someone is doing something unethical, this isn't going to help in terms of what we're going to be doing. And the other thing where our methodology does not work is if someone really is, I hate to say, I'll just use the word, a bit delusional about themselves. They have very little self-awareness. So number one, they don't blame anything but the environment and everyone else for their problems. This isn't going to work with them. They see other people as a problem. I'm not the problem in terms of what I'm going to doing that I need to change. And so, those kinds of people, it's not going to work. The other kinds of people it's not going to work for is our methodology does require a certain level of courage, humility, and discipline. And by the way, if any one of those three is missing, it's not going to work. They need some of all three of those things, right? The discipline to check in with stakeholders, the discipline to implement their plan, the discipline to follow up. And all of this, to going public and all that, really requires vulnerability by the leader, which requires what? Both courage and humility. So, if you try to put this system on a person that lacks those things, don't hold your breath. They're going to implement.
Frank, how about culture? We have so many companies now that are global. They're multinational companies. What's your experience in this being a culture-based, not being a culture-based tool or methodology?
Yes. Well, first of all, I can give secondhand information. Marshall Goldsmith literally has been all over the world. Now, maybe he hasn't done a workshop on Antarctica yet. Just about every place else he's been, and this methodology works everywhere. Yeah. Now, I'll just speak from my personal experience. I've coached a number of Asians, for instance, Japanese, Chinese, Singaporeans, Malaysians. So I've got personal experience there. I've coached Europeans, a number of Europeans. I've helped bring this methodology into the UN in terms of UNICEF with many cultures represented there, and it works. Now, when I say it works, it requires nuanced changes given an awareness of culture. Because culture is actually not that hard to explain. Culture is fundamentally, now I'm just giving short change treatment to this here, is that you understand a culture by what gets rewarded and what gets punished. Now, for instance, you take a culture that generally punishes people that admit they're weak. Then this methodology can be seen as, admitting you're weak. That's not going to work.
Right.
Or you have a culture where saving face is important. Well, You've got to modify it where the methodology is seen as helping someone save face or other people save face, and then it'll work. So, you do customize the methodology in different parts of the world, yet we find it works pretty much everywhere. I will say, though, if you want to say which cultures are harder versus easier, cultures, the more authoritarian and autocratic a culture is, the harder this will be for all the players to play. It'll be hard for the leader to be going out to others and asking for help. It'll be hard for the stakeholders to feel they are in the position to give help. So those things have to be modified. Right. And just the last thing, though, I'll say about culture, and I'll give you a perfect example. I love this example. This was sort of coaching. I was brought into a very prestigious consulting company that's near Stanford University because it came out of the decision sciences school there. Dr. Howard founded this thing, and every person in this consulting organization had at least one PhD, I swear, if not two. And I'm not just exaggerating. And these people could take apart anyone's sort of logic stream and show them what's wrong with their decision making. I mean, these people, I was so scared to be in front of this group. Each one of them got a 360 feedback report. I did a variation of a program Marshall and I developed called the Excellent Manager. And they all got feedback, and they all sat down with me one-on-one to put together an action plan. Now, this is all before we had stakeholder-centered coaching, per se. But part of the way we taught this program was we showed a movie, a classic movie called hold on a minute, I got to get the right one, Bridge on the River Kwai. And in the Bridge on the River Kwai, you're focusing on two cultures, the two characters. One represented the British culture, and this is a character played by Alec Guinness, Colonel Nicholson, and the other is played by Sessho Hayakawa, plays a Japanese commander of a prisoner of war camp. We focus on these two people. Well, we're doing this case study, and I remember I'm now debriefing this with a bunch of smarter people than me, and when we're talking about Saito, they start telling me how wrong I am. Now, interestingly enough, one of the members who was brought over from Japan, who worked in their Japan office, was a born in Japan, true Japanese consultant. And as these people are now telling me how wrong I am, they ask him to validate. And he gets up, he stands up. He hadn't been standing, he's very quiet, stands up and says, you people are all alike. You have a stereotypical view of Japanese. You think all Japanese are the same. And you think, and your sense of the same is this. You couldn't be more wrong. And I just always love that example, because I don't care what culture you're in. It may not work so much in a culture, yet every person is a bit different. And there are people in every culture where they could just take this as is and make it work for themselves. Right. So don't get limited by culture as a roadblock to any of this stuff happening.
Right. Part of what I observed when I've worked with this, and as I went through the training with you, is when I'm working in other countries, and I do a lot of work like you in Asia, I do work also in Europe. And what I've noticed is just simple business is constrained by language. I was in a meeting once in Hong Kong with my Japanese distributor, Hong Kongese, a Chinese, a Taiwanese Chinese, and a Singaporean. And we were using, and a Korean, and we were all using English as the common language for everybody. And about halfway through the meeting, I thought, no one's communicating. We're not understanding each other. And what I realized was one had learned English, the King's English, in London. Another had learned it in Australia. Another had learned it in Boston. Another in California. So our use of idioms and language varied. And so part of what I realized when I took the stakeholder-centered coaching that I loved is you're going back to your own group for feedback and for input. So you're ostensibly of similar mind and culture growing. You may be fitting it into a larger cultural context, but your immediate growth and development will be within the context of the group with which you have familiarity. And so it helps us become exceed language, I think, and culture. And that's part of what I love about it, because you don't have to be limited by that.
See, you've got that great awareness, Lois. That's why we like having people like you in our network as coaches.
Well, thank you. You know what? Any one last piece, if somebody is watching this and is on the fence thinking about coaching, any last bits of wisdom that you would like to impart to them about why they might really want to seriously consider a coach?
Well, first of all, I'd mentioned earlier that when you asked the question about, well, does this work for everybody, or are there people that, this is not going to work with? And as part of my answer, I mentioned courage, humility, and discipline.
Yes.
Is if that's just a muscle, those are, let's say, 3 muscles that you want to exercise. This is a great methodology to allow people to exercise those muscles. See, it's like, how do you build your reputation? And I think most people would like to be seen as both courageous, humble, and disciplined. And this gives people an opportunity to practice that with them. And again, even if they're good at this, get better at it. Yeah. And again, the other thing too is, one of the basic wisdoms about leadership and influence is the power of example. And so, number one, it helps leaders achieve that. So, I actually never really care what a leader is actually working on in terms of their stated goal. For that reason is, number one, a benefit they're going to get is seen as being better at those things than they were before. And the impact that other people are also going to be changing, giving credit to what's going on. And it changes the relationship, because like every muscle, you don't use it, it atrophies, you use it, it gets stronger. And when we talked about communication just now, Lois, is that we're all having to give each other feedback, or at least we need to. We all can help each other through helpful suggestions. And this methodology, by just practice, opens up and makes all that easier in both directions. So we all need the flow of information in both directions. So it helps stakeholders do a better job of influencing up. It helps leaders do a better job of the role they have to play with direct reports below them. And it just builds much stronger relationships. So that's I think the ultimate benefit of this. And then the last thing I'll say is, you said, well, you got one thing or so. I got a number of things. Is I think what I love about our methodology for the current reality is that it's time efficient. It actually doesn't take as much time as most people think in terms of for stakeholders, their involvement, for the leader, their involvement, and for us coaches. It doesn't take a lot of time to make this stuff work.
Frank, it's so wonderful to listen to you and to hear your wisdom and your experience. And I do think that it is such an incredibly pragmatic system and useful tool. Personally, I feel like I gained so much. And it also, I realized, there's a tremendous fun in your own personal growth. So I think one of the things that happens is not only is the organization and the leadership that you're working with growing, but I think we as coaches also grow and really stretch as we go through this process with our leaders.
Yes, I agree. And by the way, thank you so much, Lois, for inviting me to this.
Frank, thanks so much. And I look forward to other future discussions with you. And if any of you have questions or would like to follow up, please call us and get in touch. We would love to get you in touch with a coach that could be meaningful to you and to help you achieve your goals and the results that you would like to achieve. Thanks, everybody, for your time and for listening to us. And Frank, of course, to you. Thank you very much.
You've been listening to Building My Legacy podcast with Dr. Lois Sonstegard. To book your appointment with Dr. Sonstegard, visit www.buildtomorrow.com.